media has played a role in this, and it's for others, I guess, to parse how well or how badly the media has done. There's not a shadow of a doubt that the media has been used to help build momentum, to help build a sense of chaos, particularly this week. And any time that it looked like it was falling off, there was somebody else out and about.
The ABC's Chris Uhlmann making a claim that many of his colleagues in the parliamentary press gallery would fiercely deny. Welcome to Media Watch. I'm Jonathan Holmes. And we're going to spend tonight's programme looking at how the media covered the events of last Thursday and more generally asking whether the Canberra Press Gallery has allowed itself to be used by Kevin Rudd's supporters or is simply doing its job.
Something needs to be done to break this deadlock, to resolve the issue once and for all.
Simon Crean's dramatic press conference at 1 o'clock on Thursday was the cue for hours of coverage on the 24-hour news channels. Sky News is the channel of choice in Parliament House, and on days like this its presenters are bombarded with text messages and snippets of gossip aimed mainly at parliamentary insiders. Like this, for example.
Peter, I understand you're hearing from a Labor source that Anthony Albanese has recently just gone up to the Prime Minister in the Parliament with tears in his eyes, saying he can't support her. How are you expecting this to play out?
Well, if that is correct, and that's right, Ash, I'm told by one MP that he walked up to her in the chamber of the Parliament and said that he can't do this anymore with tears in his eyes now.
But it wasn't correct. In fact, Anthony Albanese had been moved to tears, like many in the Great Hall of Parliament House earlier that morning, by speeches in the chamber of the House of Reps about the victims of forced adoption. Sky's Peter Van Onselen soon corrected the story he'd been fed, presumably by a Rudd supporter, and he wasn't pleased at having been spun.
So I just want to make that very clear, that there is a lot of skullduggery going on here, and that was deliberately done to try to weed Albo out earlier than he may otherwise do. So we'll have to watch this space and see what happens.
The presenters on both 24-hour channels did plenty of speculating, but on the whole, they knew what they didn't know. Unlike the pundits who helped to fill the yawning hours.
It's likely, probable even, that Kevin Rudd will win, but he won't win by much. The difficulty is Julia Gillard cannot win by much either. If she wins, she's dead in the water anyway.
At least Richo used to be a Labour Party numbers man, albeit 2 decades ago. Michael Kroger is a power broker, don't you love that phrase, in the Victorian Liberal Party. So what would he know about the federal ALP?
I would expect Rudd to win, he'll run and win, and then I'd expect him to make Simon Crean Treasurer.
Answer, not much. But hey, it's easy to be wise after the event. The more serious charge about this and other leadership battles is that they're essentially an invention of the press gallery.
We constantly get calls from people who say, well, you're making this stuff up. That's not what that's not really what's going on. The government's doing a good job. In fact, this has obsessed the Labor Party. They talk of little else, of almost nothing else.
But, added Uhlmann,
although it's not a media concoction, there is absolutely no doubt that the Rudd forces have been using the media quite cleverly for some time now.
Using the media? How? Well, some believe by planting dubious stories that are uncritically relayed by obliging gallery journos. That's how many reacted to this exchange on Twitter on Thursday. The Financial Review's Philip Curry tweeted,
New South Wales right boss Dastyari orders New South Wales right to unite against Gillard.
That tweet was greeted by a series of denials from New South Wales Labor General Secretary Sam Dastyari.
Check your facts, mate. I vehemently oppose those outside the caucus making these decisions. Let me be clear. This is a complete load of BS.
Shortly afterwards, Philip Curry deleted his original tweet. But he told Media Watch,
I stand by what I tweeted. I have never been used in a leadership challenge. I'm a reporter, and I report what I know to be true.
Curry also responded to his critics on Twitter. This exchange draws out some of the issues.
Serious question. Will you in the future be trusting the source that told you Dastyari and New South Wales right was behind Rudd?
Yep.
Confident that you weren't fed bullshit?
Yep. Same people who doubt that believe Bob Carr's denials he ratted on Gillard. You got to be here 12 hours a day, every day.
What was that last tweet about? Well, this.
Ministers desert PM. Exclusive.
Peter Harter, Mark Kenny.
That story ran on the front pages of The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald last Tuesday.
An important member of the Labor right faction, Foreign Affairs Minister Bob Carr, has told colleagues that he lost confidence in Ms Gillard some time ago.
The story said that Bob Carr had switched his support from Gillard to Rudd, and added,
Senator Carr, travelling to the US, was unavailable for comment.
But Bob Carr commented soon enough from Washington.
Those articles could not have appeared if the journalist writing them had contacted me or my office and asked whether they were true. I've confirmed, talking to my people back in Australia, that no contact was made. If contact had been made, the reports would have been robustly rebutted and the story could not have appeared.
Now, for many months, Sydney Morning Herald political editor Peter Harcher has made clear his view in column after column that Kevin Rudd's dismissal was a strategic mistake which the Labor Party should rectify. He wrote an analysis piece attacking Julia Gillard on the very day that his news story appeared on the front page.
Not only is Labor consistently behind in the polls, its leader has not articulated a credible plan for any recovery.
Small wonder, perhaps, that many readers saw his front-page story as part of the pro-Rudd campaign. Yet Peter Harcher, who covers international affairs as well as politics for the Herald, stands by his story. He told Media Watch,
In the course of my job, I talk often to Bob. Other people may breach source confidentiality. I don't. Anyone who picks up the phone to people in the Labor Party, the New South Wales right, has known for the last few weeks that Bob Carr is in the Rudd column.
That's certainly what Sky News' Kieran Gilbert was assuming on Thursday afternoon, despite all those public denials by Senator Carr.
It also means that Dick Adams isn't here, he's on a plane, and Bob Carr's in New York, both in the Rudd column, Richo.
The problem for journalists in Peter Harcher's situation is if they base a story on information from a source they trust, and the subject then denies it publicly, there's not much they can do without betraying the source. The problem for readers is we're left not knowing who to believe. On Saturday, in her final column for Fairfax before going to the new Guardian Australia website, Lenore Taylor wrote this.
Anonymous sources, used very judiciously, can help to expose the truth in a situation where the rules of the game dictate that most of the politicians involved will lie. A minister who has decided to vote for a challenger must nonetheless profess loyalty to the incumbent until there is a challenge. An incumbent who knows plotting is afoot must claim the exact opposite.
But Taylor goes on to warn of
the obvious dangers of being drawn into the process in order to build momentum towards a result and of being perceived to be playing that role.
Indeed. Chris Uhlmann, who was making much the same point on Thursday afternoon, pointed the finger at one particular story, this time in News Limited papers.
There's a story on the front page of the Daily Telegraph today which was about old polling that was around at the leadership challenge in 2010, which showed apparently that Kevin Rudd would have won the next general election. That's certainly the view that John Howard had. Where do you think that came from on this day, out of the Rudd camp? It's a talking point.
It was the front page splash in both Sydney's Daily Telegraph and Melbourne's Herald Sun.
Poleaxed!
Simon Benson, National Political Editor. Internal Labor polling taken on the eve of Kevin Rudd's 2010 political assassination, suggesting the then Labor leader was rebounding, was kept secret from most senior ministers and the majority of caucus because it could have derailed Julia Gillard's coup. The survey, conducted in the marginal South Australian seat of Kingston, showed the swing against Labor was nowhere near as dire as was being suggested to MPs.
Now, you might wonder whether that was really the story the telly's readers most wanted to read that morning. And it omitted some interesting facts. The internal polling in Kingston took place in late June 2010, a day before the Gillard coup. It predicted that with Kevin Rudd as PM, Labor would experience
only a 0.5% swing against the federal government in that marginal seat.
Well, what happened in Kingston in the election in August with Julia Gillard as PM? Here's how Adelaide's and News Limited's Sunday Mail reported the result.
Amanda Rishworth has transformed the seesawing southern suburb seat of Kingston into a safe Labor seat with a huge 9.8% swing.
In fact, it was the biggest swing to Labor in the entire nation. The local member reported the Sunday Mail,
said Labor's strong performance in Kingston was a sign Julia Gillard resonated with local constituents. She grew up in this state and she's obviously a great PM, she said.
Well, that view may have changed by now, but surely the fact that the actual vote was so different from what the polling had predicted while Mr Rudd was PM was worth a mention? No, not even in the version of the story published in the Adelaide Advertiser. In a robust response to our questions, Simon Benson denies the story was some kind of handout from the Rudd camp.
I had 4 sources on the polling data, including very senior cabinet sources. As for the timing, I spent several days verifying the facts.
The Kingston election result, he says,
was immaterial to the story, which was about the secrecy and manipulation of internal polling to achieve a political outcome. In this case, the removal of a Prime Minister.
Well, you decide. Mr Benson's response will be on our website later. Like Peter Harcher, Simon Benson has always had good sources in the Rudd camp and reported them in story after story. As a result, perhaps, his reporting last Thursday morning was remarkably accurate. Rudd had, he reported, 47 votes in a caucus of 102.
On that basis, Rudd won't only not challenge, he won't even put his hand up, today or tomorrow, even if some nutcase in caucus decides to blow the whole show up and force a spill.
The syntax might have been dodgy, but the prophecy was spot on. What's left to be said? Simply this, that in their heavy reliance on anonymous sources, gallery reporters are asking us to trust them, that they're not being used by their sources. And trust in politicians and journalists is in short supply these days. What's also hard for outsiders to understand is the fever that grips everyone in Canberra's House on the Hill when a leadership story is running.
For the loss, the grief, the disempowerment, the stigmatisation and the guilt, we say sorry. To each
so far as I know, no one has said sorry to the victims of forced adoption for the fact that on their big day, most people in Parliament House, politicians and reporters alike, had their minds elsewhere. Politics, I'm not the first to observe, is a tough and murky game. Until next week, good night.